After killing Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, the Israeli army beats mourners during her funeral. As she is laid to rest, how can Palestinians use her death to highlight Israel's crimes? And can they win the battle for global public opinion? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. A funeral has been held at a Roman Catholic church in the occupied East Jerusalem for veteran Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. She was killed by Israeli forces on Wednesday. Shireen was buried next to the grave of her parents at the Mount Zion Protestant Cemetery. She was shot in the head in the occupied West Bank while covering raids by Israeli soldiers in Jenin. But before the funeral service, Israeli forces attacked those carrying her body. The mourners struggled to hold on to her coffin, and Israeli soldiers charged them while they were trying to bring it from a hospital to the hearse. The day before, her body had been taken to Ramallah, where a state memorial was held for her at the presidential compound. Israeli forces have carried out more raids in Jenin in the occupied West Bank, where Shireen was killed. Several people have been injured. Israel has been carrying out near daily raids since March, with dozens killed and arrested during the operations. It says its actions are a response to Palestinian attacks. Let's bring in our guests from occupied East Jerusalem. Munir Nuseibah is a professor of international law at Al-Quds University. From Tunis, Francesca Albanese is UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory and affiliate scholar of Georgetown University. And from Tel Aviv, Akiva Eldar is a political analyst and contributor for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Welcome to the program. Munir, now that Shireen Abu Akleh has been laid to rest, the Al Jazeera channel, the EU, the Palestinian Authority, the United Nations continue to say that those who killed her must be held accountable. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
I have to be optimistic despite the fact that I am genuinely not optimistic. The history has shown us that many crimes that have taken place in the occupied Palestinian territory have not been the perpetrators have not been held accountable so far. And this is the sad reality. And this is because of a continuous, unlimited support for Israel from its friends and partners who might sometimes criticize some of the actions that Israel conducts, but at the same time shield Israel from any sanctions, as well as refrain from supporting Palestine's attempt to seek justice at the International Criminal Court. Nonetheless, I have to continue to be optimistic. I'm a human rights defender. We are working continuously on documenting human rights violations, analyzing these human rights violations according to international law, and speaking to the international community, asking it to intervene in the way that they would intervene in any other situation. I mean, we can see how the Western countries have interacted now with the invasion of Ukraine. And they have done that. They have conducted sanctions and taken a lot of measures in order to convince Russia to step back from this invasion. And this makes sense. The same should be implemented also in Palestine.
Okay.
Of course, yes.
Let me go to Francesca. Now, after the outpouring of emotions from Palestinians rallied behind the need to start a genuine investigation into what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh and tackle the need for putting an end to impunity in Israel. This is something that has been echoed by international human rights organizations. Do you have any plan to address both issues, human rights violations, targeting of Palestinian journalists, and impunity?
Yes, indeed. First, let me put in context this killing, because I think this is also part of my work. The killing and wounding and maiming of journalists is part of a widespread series of human rights violations that take place in occupied Palestine. There are 20 journalists who have been killed and hundreds injured over the past 20-25 years. And the level of accountability is very poor. So, and this adds on the level of impunity for the widespread targeting of civilians in general. And, you know, this is what I will investigate on a regular basis. What I wish to add is that this level of violence is part and parcel of, is unavoidable, is part and parcel of the occupation, the very nature of the occupation. It takes a lot of abuse and violence to keep the population of Palestine without rights and subjugated. And yes, of course, I will look into it as part of my mandate, including how the vital role of the journalists is undermined, especially at a moment where Israeli and Palestinian civil society voices are targeted with increasing repressions. And there is no way otherwise to understand the reality on the ground if no one talks about that, reports about that.
Akiva, how would you characterize the way the Israeli government has been handling the aftermath of the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh and the international backlash?
Well, I think, Hashem, that both sides are cynically taking advantage of this tragedy. Shireen is dead. I knew her personally and I admired her work. And I'm very upset that the president of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, was there to blame it on Israel before the Israelis even started the inquiry. On the other hand, Israel was rushing to blame it on the terrorists. I think that if Shireen was not a famous journalist and the international community followed this event closely, I think that she would be added to a long list of fatalities that are, as was said before, part of the occupation. I believe that in no time you'll hear Israelis blaming the international community for double standards. I just checked, and I'm sure that this will be mentioned, that in the last 2 months, 14 journalists were killed in the Ukrainian war. And do you know their names? This is what they will ask you. No, you don't. So it's part of the anti-Israeli, BDS, anti-Semitism, and so on. On the other hand, a member of the Israeli cabinet, who was the spokesman of the army, Nachman Shai, called for an independent investigation because he said that Israel lost its credibility in such occasions.
Francesca, as an expert in international law, working for the UN, dealing now with your mandate is about documenting human rights violations and addressing them in the Palestinian occupied territory. Give us a sense about how to move forward. What are the tools that you have to bring about the case, and how will you be handling it as far as the Israeli government is concerned? Because they seem to be pretty much now in denial about any responsibility.
Look, I think it doesn't matter if they are in denial or not. I think I agree with what has been said, that the pressure, because of who Shireen was, the pressure on the concerned parties, Israel in particular, is very high at the moment. So it's all expected that Israel extend its cooperation to an independent investigation. I don't think that, that Israel should be in the lead of this investigation for one simple reason, because what is needed is independence, transparency, rigor that so far the Israeli military investigative system has shown falling short of. And the justice system in general in Israel, as it has been confirmed by the recent decision of the Israeli Supreme Court on the case of Masafer Yatta, is, I'm sorry to say, part and parcel of maintaining and policing the occupation. So what is to happen is that independent experts are given the possibility to investigate, and then this must inform the investigation on the overall situation in Palestine that is being carried out by the ICC prosecutor, of which we don't know much yet. But what I can tell when it concerns journalists, just recently, the International Federation of Journalists has submitted a formal complaint to the court in the name of four journalists who have been killed in Gaza, together with the bombing of 2 media towers, for a prompt investigation. So this is the course of action that I hope we will see happening.
Munir, do you see this as a moment to bring about the issue of the killing of many Palestinian journalists over the last few years, and Palestinian authorities saying that they are adamant about the need to take the case of Shireen Abu Akleh to the International Criminal Court?
Well, it's very important that at the end of the day, the International Criminal Court takes its responsibility on the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. We have been waiting now for a long time for the International Criminal Court to intervene in the way that it is supposed to intervene. Now it has confirmed that it has jurisdiction, and we expect the International Criminal Court to start taking action. But also it's very important to say that Israel has been, over the years, not cooperating with different human rights operations that are ongoing by, for example, the United Nations, the procedures and all the like. For example, all the special rapporteurs of the occupied Palestinian territory, like your guest, Professor Albanese, have not been allowed to enter Palestine. And this is something that has to change. If Israel has any claim of seeking truth, then they have to allow the independent experts like her, and also like the Commission of Inquiry that was founded last year by the United Nations. They should be allowed to enter. They should be allowed to meet with civil society. They should be allowed to investigate on their own and find evidence. But unfortunately, over the years, we have been seeing that Israel has boycotted every possible UN procedure that seeks to find truth or seeks to find justice. And at the same time, what is very unfortunate is that many of the states in the world, for example, the European Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and others, are boycotting Item 7, which is an item in the Human Rights Council meetings and sessions in Geneva, where the issue of Palestine is being discussed 3 times a year. They are boycotting it, and this is very sad. While they might condemn in some cases or question Israel's actions, they are acting in the international arena in a very different way.
All right.
That is not consistent with their words.
Akiva, you get somehow a sense that the Israeli government is more concerned about not losing the PR war as far as the aftermath of the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh is concerned. Because from day one, they said, no, it's not us. Then they said, we blame it on the Israeli fighter, on the Palestinian fighters. Now they seem to be somehow backtracking, saying that we're investigating a case where the fire may have come from Israeli soldiers.
Yeah, the good news is that unlike the previous governments headed by Netanyahu and the radical right, now we have a Muslim party, Mansour Abbas, who is still a member of the coalition, as well as Haaretz and the Labour Party. And the Prime Minister Bennett has to take them into consideration. And like Mr. Nachman Shai, the minister that I mentioned before, is a member of the Labour Party. So they have to look into this from a political angle. On the other hand, if they will allow an impartial investigation by independent inquiry, like if you remember what happened with Richard Goldstone in 2009, that he was boycotted by Israel, and then he regretted the minute he was tempted to join this committee, head this committee. So I believe that at the end of the day, a mutual investigation is not possible, a joint Israeli-Palestinian investigation, because just imagine, do you really expect Israel to allow Palestinians to interview Israeli soldiers? On the other hand, the Israeli members of the committee will interview members of the Hamas that they consider terrorists. So yes, Israel is more concerned about PR than before. Israel now has to take into consideration also its relationship with Qatar. Qatar was playing a major role in trying to quiet Gaza and the Hamas and the Abraham Accords. So Israel has got something to lose. On the other hand, we don't see sanctions here. Israel is enjoying a complete impunity. And in the best case, even if Israeli soldiers will be found accountable for this, there will be a disciplinary process. I remember that when I did this kind of inquiries, it ended up with almost nothing. They will say that this is a war zone, and journalists are part of the whole game, and they pay the price as other civilians.
Okay, Francisca, you've just heard what Akiva has been saying, and when you look at it, the potential for army generals prosecute their own soldiers for the case of Shireen Abu Akleh are really slim here. And the US, the EU, the UK, generally speaking, have done their best to shelve any United Nations report about human rights violations in the Palestinian occupied territory. So the outcome looks somber in a way or another.
Yes, I see that argument, and I also agree with Akiva. The problem is addressing the root causes of this situation. There are two things, two comments I would like to make here. On the one hand, the case of Shireen must be investigated, as we have said, independently. On the other hand, it's teaching a lesson. Violence and impunity only brings to further violence and abuse. We need to zoom out from the specificity of the situation, and I really encourage the actors the political actors you mentioned to stop using an ad hoc and emergency humanitarian reflex when approaching the question of Palestine. The situation in occupied Palestine is not that of an emergency if unless we understand it as a man-made one. It's a political reality dominated by widespread abuses and violence that requires a urgent political actions, starting with the dismantlement of the occupation and the settlement enterprise. I see no other way to get out of the impasse than discussing how to end the occupation.
Okay.
Otherwise, we are just running in circle.
Munir, we do understand the reason why there is this squabble over the semantics of the investigation. But don't you see that ultimately, if you have Israeli experts, along with Palestinian experts, with an oversight from the United Nations, the US, that could be the ideal outcome?
I don't see the reason why this is needed. Israel knows who shot the bullet already. And it has the capacity, just in the same way that we see that Israel has the capacity to find any Palestinian they want, if they even posted something on Facebook, or if they carried a weapon or whatever, and they will go into Palestinian cities and villages in order to arrest them and prosecute them, regardless of of any difficulties and obstacles in their way. Why is this Israeli intelligence not intelligent enough to find their own criminals? And why, when they find these criminals, they don't prosecute them? It's because of the original problem. It's because of the way the system is built. The system is built to protect its politicians, to protect its military men, and to make sure that they are not prosecuted. Because, see, human rights organizations, Palestinian, Israeli, and international, have concluded that this is an apartheid regime, that it is actually dominating the Palestinians, and it is creating and organizing its legal system in a way, engineering its legal system in a way that would eventually make sure that the Palestinians are kept dominated. Actually, we could see this in the way the funeral was held today. The police was just running after people, hitting people with their sticks, the people who are actually carrying the coffin of the martyr. And it's part of their domination. They want to show us that they are in control, that people cannot express their feelings, they cannot express their anger, they cannot carry a Palestinian flag, and they cannot be sad in the way that they want to be sad.
Okay.
So this is the regime, and the problem with the regime is actually its laws and its legal system and its courts, and this is something that has been concluded. So if they want to find justice, I'm sure they can do it immediately.
Let's move forward. We I still have very few other issues to tackle here. Akiva, do you think that the very nature of the Israeli governing coalition is one of the reasons that will decide the outcome of what happens next? Because the Prime Minister is really pretty much concerned about giving any indication that a concession to the Palestinians about Shireen Abu Akleh could be seen as a sign of weakness.
Absolutely. His hands are tied, one hand by members of his own party, Yemina, who are threatening to bring down the coalition, the government, and as I mentioned before, by the Muslim party, by Mansour Abbas. Actually, Mahmoud Abbas is not part of this game. They don't take him into consideration. But I think that the context that the Israelis see this event is that it happened few days after 3 Israelis were killed, were butchered, civilians, innocent, by 2 Palestinian youngsters, probably coming from Jenin. So I'm not going to justify what happened in Jenin and the killing of Shireen, but trying to analyze the Israeli point of view. If you do a public poll, if Bennett probably is doing it, what he will find out that the Israelis care more about the threat of terrorism coming mainly from the Jenin refugee camp, than about what happened to Shireen. And this is very unfortunate, because this is a vicious circle that is not going to end soon. I'm really afraid.
Francesca, less than a minute. The Israeli government made it clear when your name was first presented to take over the post of the United Nations rapporteur for the Palestinian occupied territory, accusing you of being a biased person. The Americans, as we said, and along with with some key players, the Europeans and the UK, have always been very skeptical about the reports of Human Rights Council. How are you planning to move forward?
Well, let me share a consideration I have on the momentous reality we are living, also because of the tragic war that is taking place in Ukraine. This situation has given me a sense of hope in the fact that these countries, like those who have criticized the Human Rights Council, as Professor Nuseibah was saying, item 7 of the Human Rights Council as targeting Israel. Well, it gives me the sense that these countries still believe in a in an international order premised upon international law, because at the moment everyone is an expert about the human rights and international humanitarian law being violated in Ukraine. I see an incredible blind disconnect between these arguments, these upholding.
Thank you.
Rightly so, upholding international law to Palestine. So look, eventually it boils down to political will.
Thank you.
They might oppose what I say, but what I say is based on international humanitarian law.
Unfortunately,
I would like to be challenged on the substance, not on my intentions.
We'll have to leave it there. Akiva Eldar, Francesca Albanese, Munir, Nuseibah, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.